Good afternoon. My name is Luann Gruber, and I am here today to talk to you about the importance of communication in the coaching-athlete relationship. I am presently enrolled in the Performance Psychology Master's Program at National University. My presentation to you is on effective communication and the coach-athlete relationship. Next slide, please. Communication is considered the transfer of thoughts, ideas, feelings, and attitudes, both verbally and non-verbally. The two major forms of communication are verbal and nonverbal, verbal being words, and nonverbal referring to forms of communication that occur through body movements. Body language is considered a significant aspect of modern communications and relationships. It is described as a method of communicating using body movements and gestures instead of or in addition to verbal language. Communication has been recognized as a crucial piece in the puzzle that is the art of coaching, possibly the most important element. The communication style used by coaches is dependent upon the athlete's age and skill level. At younger ages and lower skill levels, a combination of instructional and autocratic or a rigid style of communicating is commonly used. As an athlete ages and develops a higher level of skill, the relationship often shifts to an open, interactive style, ultimately changing to a mutually respectful two-way collaboration when we are speaking of a coach and an elite athlete. Research based on questionnaires and interviews of athletes who competed in the 1984 Olympics concluded that almost all athletes who performed to their potential had a collaborative two-way communication style with their coaches. Open communication is critical when considering the 5 key elements of psychological skills training: relaxation, self-talk, imagery, goal setting, and concentration. The relationship and communication style between the athlete and consultant is quite different than between the coach and the athlete. Today we are focusing on the coach-athlete relationship. We are going to discuss the importance of effective communication from a coach's perspective and an athlete's perspective using 3 case study scenarios. In doing so, we will become aware of the difference in communication styles between the off-season and the competitive season, the effect of silence on communication, and issues of performance difficulty or poor performance on communication. We will also be able to identify barriers to effective communication in these scenarios. Next slide, please. Let's talk a little bit about the difference between the practice season and the competitive season. There is a striking difference in the communication process and attitude of both players and coaches. Prior to and during the off-season, coaches express a philosophy that views the process of coaching elite athletes as interactive, with the expectation that athletes are willing to work hard. The coach is typically feeling less pressure from upper management within the organization. The atmosphere is collaborative. The two are able to work jointly together to improve performance. Time is also a consideration as there is no pressure for immediate improvement. Time can be taken to analyze problems an athlete is having with skills, and a plan for improvement can be implemented. Athletes prefer a positive, open, and interactive relationship with their coaching staff, but also want a mix of fun with the work. Athletes expect positive training experiences with a variety of methods to be used in training. There is less pressure on performance perfection, and time is not critical. Overall, this period places fewer emotional demands on both coaches and athletes. Next slide, please. The start of the competitive season may bring discrepancies between these perspectives and what is really happening. As competition heats up, both coaches and athletes sometimes stray from their philosophy of effective communication and coaching style. Events or issues may occur over the course of a season that will negatively impact the communication involved in the coach-athlete relationship. From a coach's perspective, there is more pressure placed on them for getting results, which in turn increases their stress level. They also have much higher expectations from their athletes. All the hard work and planning that occurred in the off-season should be paying off. The athlete is receptive to and requires feedback. Poor performance, emotions, attitudes, and dealing with team personalities by the athlete may lead to ineffective communication during this stage. The athlete is feeling increased pressure to perform at a higher level, which increases their level of stress. During the competitive season, there is increased stress and pressure placed on the coach, who, in turn, has higher expectations of performance from athletes. This leads to barriers developing which impact communication. These barriers arise from both the coach and athlete, and often are a result of poor performance and silence. We are now going to consider some scenarios which evolved into ineffective and poor communication. The situations come from research conducted by Culver and Trudell. Their studies was conducted with an elite alpine ski team. I'm just going to read the scenario to you, and then we will analyze what happened. Situation 1, silence. The scenario is athlete Jane is feeling pressure to perform and has expressed a complete lack of communication with Coach Bob. Jane is quiet and timid, typically shy when communicating. The athlete's perspective. I skied really well, but I was slow and I almost stopped at the bottom because I couldn't see the next gate. Coach Bob hasn't spoken to me. I think he's angry with me. I was having some trouble in the training runs for the last few days, and I did everything really well today and nailed the tough sections. I am in a bad, depressed mood right now. Coach Bob's perspective. I sometimes get really frustrated with an athlete's performance. I don't know what to say, so I don't say anything. That's probably not a great thing to do. I don't know. She really struggled out there today. I think she needs a lot of support, but I was so frustrated at that point. I'm under an incredible amount of pressure from above, a lot of stress. I need to work on this. I need to figure out a constructive way to deal with frustration. She didn't tell me that she thought I was angry. For sure, she would have thought that I was, because I was, just not at her. There is so much stress from above. So now we'll translate and analyze. Next slide, please. Here is what happened in that interaction. Coach Bob was frustrated and did not know how to communicate. So he decided against sending a verbal message. Even though he sent no verbal message, the athlete perceived the silence as a message and decoded it as Coach Bob being angry with her, which was only partially true. The coach was frustrated because of poor performance that was confounded by pressure from above. Due to the athlete's poor communication skills, she was unable to go to the coach and discuss the issue. Her confidence, which was low to begin with, was negatively influenced. This is a typical situation where one person is silent, and that silence is perceived as something it may not be. In this case, the athlete perceived it as anger or disappointment towards her by the coach, and the reality is the coach is just not good with dealing with frustration and pressure and communicating those thoughts to the athlete. All right. Situation 2 is another instance of silence. The scenario. Several months after the previous incident, Coach Bob and 2 athletes, Jane and Susan, spent 2 weeks training and competing together. Then the 2 athletes went to some races with their regional teams, and Coach Bob took another group of athletes to the World Juniors. The incident happened when the 2 athletes rejoined Bob and the other athletes. Bob had been traveling for several days and arrived at the competition tired and overworked. With twice as many athletes as usual to look after, he was stretched to the limit in terms of having time to do everything. Both athletes, Jane and Susan, were worried because the coach was not talking to them. They thought he might have lost confidence or interest in them. They wanted to understand Bob's behavior, but were unsure how to approach the problem. They decided to go and talk to Coach Bob. So the athlete's perspective. I'm fine for any other technical stuff. It's just asking for stuff about me that I have a problem with, because I don't want to be a pain. But I think talking whenever you have a problem is important. It's my belief that you have to go and be really demanding and just say, hey, listen, what's up? Even if they're going to be mad or angry afterwards. It usually makes things better. I find it really hard to ask for emotional support, even though I feel it's very important. Coach Bob's perspective. They were frustrated because we didn't see each other for 2 weeks. You know, we are short-staffed. We have 15 girls here, and the first couple of days there was only Charles and myself. So there are a lot of things going on where we have to cover a lot of things, you know, more than just them. They didn't react to that very well. They thought that they were getting left out of things and didn't really know what's going on. They felt that us not talking to them as much meant that we were losing confidence in them and that we didn't care anymore. That kind of stuff, to me, shows that their self-confidence, you know, there's an issue there. Next slide, please. So the translation is what really happened during this interaction. Coach Bob just did not have time to communicate with the athletes because of the pressure put on him to take care of many athletes at that time. The athletes had previously had the chance to work very closely with Bob and had developed certain expectations of him. These high expectations were now challenged in this new context. Athletes knew that it is important to communicate, but they believed that in this ski team it is all right to ask advice about technical or tactical matters, but maybe not for other types of help. This is another typical situation where a lack of communication or silence compounds the issue. If not fully resolved, this situation could grow out of control and have a negative impact on the performance of both athletes. In the 2 incidents of silence, both the coach and the athlete were unable to communicate effectively. Coaches of elite teams put more emphasis on winning than those of non-elite teams, primarily due to the pressure from administration or management to get results. Coaches are often evaluated solely on the team's performance, and this may sometimes harm their interactions with athletes. It's also possible for coaches to be so overwhelmed by the stress that they are under that they do not realize that their lack of communication is having a negative effect on the athletes. Silence from the athlete causes a breakdown, as does silence from the coach. Okay, now our last scenario deals with performance. Athlete Susan was technically weak when she joined the team, but made exceptional progress during the 2 summer camps. Coach Bob's perspective after the last preseason camp. She improved a lot with us during that second camp. She took a lot of work, but she's capable and coachable. So we are making some good changes and will get her going in the right direction. The changes she has made are unbelievable. We videotape all runs and you wouldn't recognize her. If I could have 5 or 6 Susans on the team, that would be amazing. Athlete Susan's perspective at the same time period after the last preseason camp. I think the main thing is just believing. It was frustrating to a point because I'd look ahead and see everyone skiing down and be like, how am I going to get there? Believing it is going to happen and your coach is believing in you, that he knows it's going to happen. I found that assuring, that it's going to come. You've got one part, you need another, and it's going to come. All of a sudden, one day it did. Then once it does, you gain confidence and get better and better. You need somebody who wants to change with you. A few months into the season, Coach Bob is frustrated with Susan's performance. Coach Bob's perspective. I am very frustrated with Susan. She's taking criticism badly and is very sensitive. I'm trying to give her technical info to help her skiing, but feel like I'm not getting anywhere. She always has to work harder, have an extra run. I don't know what to do with her. When reminded that he had previously stated he would like to have 5 or 6 athletes like Susan, he replied, "Yeah, that was during the training, and she was doing really well." Athlete Susan's perspective. At first I felt a lot of pressure, but that was from me wanting to do well, not from the coaches. I've never gone over goals with the coach and think that doing goals would have reassured me. Sometimes it's just good to know that you are on the same page as the coach and know what's going on and what is expected. Maybe I could have avoided some of that pressure I was putting on myself. Next slide, please. Translation. What really happened? The coach was the initiator of ongoing messages, and the issue was the athlete's performance. The culture was affecting the athlete as she put pressure on herself to live up to the status of being named to the team. In addition, neither the coach nor the athlete appeared clear concerning appropriate goals for her. The athlete's confidence was low, and her emotional feedback added to the coach's frustration concerning her performance, which in turn changed his attitude toward her. This athlete expressed that she felt a pressure to perform and live up to her selection to the junior national team. This issue demonstrated a deterioration of effective coach-athlete communication that was affected by external pressure on the coach and pressure to perform on the athlete. The result was a loss of confidence and belief for both the coach and athlete. The athlete in this incident was very clear that believing in herself and feeling that the coaches believed in her enhanced her performance. As athletes developed into elite performers, there is not a lot of technical coaching that is required. Athletes need emotional and motivational support. Believing that the coach believes in the athlete and that they're coaching from a positive perspective is critical. Both coaches and athletes are responsible for communication. It is a critical element which affects an athlete's performance. Silence by one party leads to misunderstanding and may have negative effects on individual and team performance. Poor or declining performance needs to be addressed immediately. It takes at least 2 people for successful communication. Both the coach and athlete should recognize a responsibility and form a commitment to establish effective communication. Next slide, please. All right, and as long as anybody doesn't have any questions, thank you very much for your attention, and you've been a great audience. Thank you very much.